Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Liz McGill. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon for this seminar with the California Attorney General's Office and the Attorney General herself with the release of their 2015 data breach report. The Stanford Cyber Initiative has become a central hub on campus for discussions of cybersecurity and, more broadly, the effects of technology on society. So it's very fitting that they would bring us together to learn more about the efforts of California Attorney General's Office's effort to combat cybercrime. The Attorney General's Office runs programs that address cyber exploitation, privacy, identity theft, and other cyber safety concerns, and it now has an crime unit that is tasked with investigating and prosecuting large-scale identity theft and technology crimes. In recent years, the office has also taken the reports of major data breaches that are required by law, which unfortunately have become more frequent in recent years, and turned them into annual reports like the one Attorney General Harris will present today with recommendations on prevention for both individuals and businesses. These initiatives are driven by Attorney General Kamala Harris, who assumed office as the 32nd Attorney General of California in 2011. Attorney General Harris graduated from Howard University and the University of California Hastings College of Law. She then worked as a deputy district attorney, managing attorney of the Career Criminal Unit in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, and was elected District Attorney of San Francisco. She was elected Attorney General of California in 2011 and re-elected in 2014. Since Kamala Harris became Attorney General, she has focused on many critical issues like combating transnational gangs, reducing child truancy, protecting and securing relief for homeowners during the foreclosure crisis, as well as enhancing online privacy for safety for consumers. She has made cybersecurity a focus of her office, and by doing so, she has helped to raise the profile of this important issue for millions of Californians, as well as folks nationally. She's helped emphasize for many businesses based here the importance of strong information security practices. So we're very happy to have you with us today, Attorney General. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General Harris.
Thank you, Jane, and for your leadership and collaboration. It's always a joy for us to collaborate with the finest and best minds in our state, and of course, many of them come from Stanford, but thank you for the work that you do. I'm very excited about our discussion. I'm going to say a few things for several minutes, but then I really want to open it up for a conversation with everyone who's here, because I'm very interested in your perspective and how you are experiencing the world in these issues. I do want to begin, though, by thanking Dan Boneh and George Triantis, who are the co-directors of the Stanford Cyber Initiative. It's a relatively new initiative, I know, but we're really excited about it, and that's why we at the California Department of Justice have been partnering with you. So let's start at the beginning. You know, I will tell you, I think of the technology that is being produced in California, probably with a bit of bravado as a daughter of California. My mother was a scientist, so she actually spent her time working under the hood of in a lab. She had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters and to end breast cancer. And as we know, scientists and engineers and folks who are creating this technology, their purpose is it's pretty pure and pretty straightforward. It's about a life that is in pursuit of innovation. And when I think of innovation, I think we all will agree that we don't pursue innovation because, we're bored with things the way they've been. It's about being in pursuit of systems and what we can do to be more efficient and more effective and more accurate and faster. So it's very exciting. And as we know, and I say with a bit of bravado then, the technology that is changing the world is being produced right here in our backyard in California. And then we can put it also in the perspective of this, certainly the way I think of it. I think there was creation of fire and the wheel and electricity and this. Absolute game changer. So how does all of that then relate to this issue of what we need to do around privacy? So privacy, for many of us, we know, learning this in law school, simply put, our fundamental notions of privacy were really evolved around the physical structure of a house. right? And so we would talk about and we learn about privacy from the perspective of this. So the things that we keep inside a house, our homes, are things we consider valuable, that are ours. We have decided that, well, if you're walking by a house during the daylight and you look through the window from the public street, whatever you can see by looking through the window from the street, well, is that a violation of privacy? And what do you see when you do that? If you walk by the house and it's nighttime and the lights of the house are on, what do you then see? A little bit more. What invasion of privacy is there if you see what you see because you walk through the front door of that house? What invasion of privacy is there if you see what you see because you've walked through the front door and through the bedroom and you've opened the top drawer of the dresser drawer in the bedroom? All these various layers. And so we have discussed the Fourth Amendment from that perspective. We have discussed the Fourth Amendment in terms of what violation has existed, not only in terms of those things that we consider, right, our subjective thoughts about what we consider to be private, but also based on what type of intrusion occurs in order for someone to have access to that which you consider and we consider to be private. Well, now, how are we going to apply these long-held traditions and discussions and case precedent about what constitutes an intrusion when everything, so much of what is valuable to us, is now in a cloud? So when I think about this issue of privacy, it's obviously very exciting because what we are doing now, I think, is setting the discussion, setting the plate, if you will, for what is going to be a whole new era of discussion about the tools of intrusion that violate one's privacy, since, of course, many of these tools have been created by the cloud and what the cloud allows us to do and have access to. So thinking of it then from that perspective, think of it in terms of how the internet has improved our lives, but also created a new frontier for 21st century crimes, right? Crimes like identity theft, hacking, cyber exploitation. And increasingly also, we are saying, and certainly my office has been saying, and we read about it every day, nation states are engaged in those types of crimes. Transnational criminal organizations are engaged in those kinds of crimes. And so when we are thinking about it in the Attorney General's office, in the California Department of Justice, we're thinking about it, and I think about it certainly as California's top cop, in the same way that I think about traditional crime, which is, let's dispense with the false choice that suggests that on criminal justice policy, one is either soft on crime or tough on crime. Instead, let's ask, are we smart on crime? Let's look at the public health model that tells us quite well how we should deal with an epidemic. And it tells us, if we want to be cost efficient and effective, prevention first. If the sniffles take on, the problem starts to manifest itself, early intervention, but if we're dealing with it in the emergency room, prison system, far too late, much too expensive. Prevention, being just a smart way to approach and guide public policy when we're trying to avoid something that we believe will harm us. And so on this issue, I'm thinking of the traditional concept of privacy, but thinking of it from the perspective of also what we can do to prevent the harm that we fear. And so let's think about what we consider to be private. And in particular, as it relates to everything that we have uncovered with the data breaches that we outlined. We know that there are everything from our location now because of GPS, something that someone can have information about, and it will be valuable to them for some reason or another, and we can have more discussion about that. Our social security numbers, our bank account numbers, our medical information, our photographs, our conversations, our personal conversations, be it through messaging or voicemail. All of these things now are capable of being revealed, of being the privacy of those things being threatened. You know, when I first got my social security number, the way I was presented with it was this little blue card. And one would keep that blue card, which contained one's social security number, very safely inserted in one's wallet and would not share it with anyone. And the tool then of intrusion to get that would be you'd have to actually steal my wallet to get it. Now that information is in the cloud. Let's think about it in terms of privacy around the location. Where are we? Where do we go every day? What do we do? Right? Maybe this is interesting to a corporation that's trying to figure out your lifestyle to sell you products. Maybe it's interesting to someone who just has some other purpose in knowing where you've been and where you go. Well, traditionally, in order for someone to really figure that out, either they'd have to get in their car and literally follow you, or they'd have to pay an extremely large amount of money to hire a private investigator to monitor all your activities on a daily basis for at least a week, much less a month or 6 months. It was very difficult to violate your privacy in those kinds of ways. Think about it in terms of your telephone conversations. In order, traditionally, for someone to have access to your telephone conversations, well, do you ever remember all those old TV cop shows like Starsky and Hutch? And basically, what they'd have to do is they'd have to pretend to be the phone guy, the phone company guy, and then climb up a pole, and then have that apparatus where they could listen in on your conversation. It was really difficult. Or if there was a police officer who was trying to do it in connection with a criminal investigation, they'd have to go down to the phone company and talk that person who was behind the window into saying, can I see these pages and pages of information about who he has called and when and how long was that conversation. Access to this private information in a day gone by was really actually difficult to get, like physically difficult. It took an investment of extreme amount of time, if not resources in terms of money. Now, because of technology, literally with the tap of one's finger, it doesn't even require any physical energy. Right? You don't have to push open a door. With the tap of one's finger, you might have access to all this information that would be considered private. So there is that part of it. And then there is the part of it about also us understanding the value of our private information, right? There are things we value, and it might be a photograph of ourselves with our dearly departed grandparent. We value that. We'd never want to lose it. We might share it, but we definitely wouldn't want to lose it. But, you know, in the cloud, right, we can share it with anyone and still keep it ourselves. The thing can't be taken. And then there are other things that are valuable to us, but even more valuable in the hands of someone who shouldn't have that information, like your Social Security number. There are things that are valuable to us because it just involves something that is private. Like our medical records. You know, my mother used to have the saying. She had many sayings, but there's a very big and subtle but important distinction between a secret and what's private, right? Privacy is something where we should just be entitled to have those things about our lives that are ours. And if we choose to share it, that's fine. It's not a secret. It's nothing bad. But those things that are just ours, and if we choose to share it, we may. We don't have to. All of these concepts now are being called into question based on the ease with which one can get access to your information that we historically thought of as private. And so let's look at where the law then stands on some of these notions based on the technology that has been evolving. Well, first of all, California Constitution, unique in many ways. One is unique in that it's rare that states have it, but we do. We explicitly in our Constitution outline privacy as an inalienable right. So it is a right. We passed in 2003 CalOPA, right, which was the first state law to require privacy policies from website operators and online services. And so what we know is if you collect a consumer's personal information, you have to let them know what you do with it. That's what the law says in California since 2003. And because of our breach notification law, also in 2003, also a first, you must, meaning that person that possesses other people's private information, you must alert individuals as soon as possible if that data is compromised. We also have a set of laws, of course, that protect individuals from crimes such as identity theft or extortion, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the laws that we have also are evolving but have addressed are focused on what we are doing in terms of cyber exploitation. So, okay, in transition, I'll say this. So, as Attorney General, I think of my role and the role of my office to have three parts, three components that are equally powerful. There is the component of the job that is about the statutory and technical job of being Attorney General, of filing cases, investigations, and things of that nature. There is then also the bully pulpit, incredibly powerful. At any given moment, I can have a bouquet of microphones in front of me. And hopefully we will use that in a way that is responsible and is about elevating public discourse and informing the public and engaging in public information to consumers about their rights, things of that nature. And then there is the third component that I think is sorely underused, which is the power to convene. To bring folks together who otherwise may exist in their silos, bring them together, hey, come on over, sit around our conference table for about an hour, let's take a look at this and see how we can all participate in a solution. So those three areas of focus. So in terms of the role of the Attorney General on issues such as privacy, as the Dean has indicated to you, we created the Privacy Enforcement and Protection Unit. We created the e-crime unit. Both of those units focused on what we need to do and can do with the tools that we have as the Department of Justice to, one, go after, investigate, and then prosecute people who commit crimes with technology. And the second piece of that, to do what is necessary to make sure that we are safeguarding and protecting consumers' privacy rights. And so, for example, in 2015, there was a startup company called Houzz. And it was started right here in Silicon Valley, and they were recording employees' calls without the knowledge or consent of the folks that they were speaking with. To address the issue, essentially what we needed to do and what needed to also be done as an industry practice was we needed to make sure that there was, as part of the development and the business model of that kind of industry, that there was an understanding that there needed to be explicit privacy rules in place. And in particular, what we decided to do to address that case was to require Houzz to hire a privacy officer, a chief privacy officer. This is not something, of course, that we would normally do or had traditionally done in connection with our litigation. But it was an example and is an example of what we can do in terms of being creative, looking at prevention, and also focusing on the enforcement power and how we can use it in a way that actually is going to be beneficial and have impact. And so I would say this, that using that as an example, part of what I think is important that government does on issues where there is a question of violation of the law as it relates to privacy and technology is I think that government has to focus on structural changes and keep that in mind as we are addressing these kinds of cases, which is there may be specific violations, but the fix can be broader than just enforcement and punishment. And so that example exists. Another case is in 2015, we prosecuted the Bollert case, which received a lot of attention and was a case, the first in the country, where State Department of Justice prosecuted a website provider who was basically extorting money from individuals whose photographs were depicted after being posted on his website. We brought the first criminal prosecution in the country, and he was found guilty by a jury and is now serving 8 years in the state prison. So that is an example of the enforcement power. In terms of the convening power, many of you may remember what we did back in 2011 around mobile apps. So the short story, kind of long, is this. It was back in about 2010, or 2011, early in 2011 when I first came in office, and a group of my lawyers came into my office. And they said, hey, boss, that's what they call me, did you know that when you download a mobile app, they can download your entire contact list? And I said, no, I actually did not know that. And they said, well, you know, privacy is explicit in California's Constitution. Yes, I know that. So they were very excited. They said, so let's sue. And I looked at them and I said, okay, slow down, cowboys. We're going to try and approach this a little differently. And so what we did is we called the 6 big online providers and basically said to them, hey guys, you got to come in and we got to talk about this. And I'm not suggesting any of them was excited to get a call from the Attorney General saying you got to come in and talk about some rules, but they did. And after 6 months, we worked out an all too rare example of government and industry to come together to solve a problem short of litigation or legislation or regulation, the power to convene. And those companies were Amazon and Apple and Google and HP and Microsoft and then a bigger player than now, I think, Research in Motion. And then there is the role of the Attorney General in terms of the bully pulpit and outreach and education, and that's where the data breach report comes in. The data breach report, as much as anything, is designed to be a tool that is helpful to industry, to businesses, to help them avoid breaking the law by violating individuals' privacy. Underlying this issue is this fact. Businesses now, because of the technology and the way it exists and what it can do, are in possession of an incredibly large amount of other people's private information in a way they weren't necessarily before. And there then should be a responsibility for them to do everything they can to ensure that that private information is kept safe. And so this data breach is, as much as anything, about outlining the legal and ethical responsibilities that businesses should and must have to keep that information safe, but doing it in a way that we believe will also help businesses define what is reasonable in terms of what they must do to maintain reasonable standards. So let's talk a little bit about our vigilance and what our vigilance should be in terms of looking at how we rethink our approach to privacy protection in the 21st century. So let's think of 4 things in particular, 4 trends that I think are converging. 1, the rise of the smartphone and the Internet of Things. We're now collecting exponentially more data, some which is very sensitive. We talked about that before. 2, concerns about notice and consent. Current privacy policies are they're just impenetrable for most readers. They don't understand it. They click, yes, 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 and they get to the end, and they've not read a thing. It is estimated that most of us would spend 250 hours per year if we read the privacy policy on every website or mobile app that we download. It's not happening. 3, the growth of big data, right? It's a business model. It creates a business model that has created an incentive, rightly, I think, for the collection of data and analysis of data. When I started my career, we had big data. You know what that looked like? It was a really tall aluminum file cabinet. It had hundreds and hundreds of files. That was big data. Technology has now changed that thing, the entire meaning of it. We can now have all this information and actually do something with it, right? So big data. And then 4, increasingly sophisticated hackers. And this is a reality, which means that our data is not as safe. So let's jump right into the data breach report and the key findings from 2016, which is this latest of the 3 that we have published. What we were able to do with this latest report in 2016 is actually compare and see trends over the last 3 years. So we're pretty excited about that. The report analyzes all breaches that were reported to the Department of Justice, California Department of Justice. What we found is there were 657 breaches since 2012 that impacted 49 million records from Californians. There were 178 breaches in 2015, which means there was a 36% increase since 2012. And the number of individuals impacted in 2015 was 24 million, which is a jump of 850%. Exponentially more consumers are being impacted. Our findings include that the data breached included Social Security numbers, payment card data, and medical information. The industries most impacted include, and high on the list was retail, the financial sector, healthcare, and also small businesses we're seeing increasingly are being affected. The most common and fastest growing type of breach, malware and hacking. You can see it there. Up 45% in 2012 to 50, up from 45% in 2012 to 58% in 2015, while physical breaches have gone down, but are the second most common. The majority of these breaches occurred and resulted from security failures, and nearly all of them, in all of them, the exploited vulnerabilities that enabled these breaches were compromised over a year after the solution to patch the vulnerable issue was publicly available. Big delay. The majority of these were not only over a year after, but involved, of course, all of the previously discussed private information that, when in the hands of others, could do harm to us as individuals. So, for example, in one of them, there was a healthcare employee that stole a laptop that had on it unencrypted sensitive medical and personal information, and there would have been two very simple security fixes, which is better control the device, that's obvious, and preventing the theft in that way, and then also encrypting the sensitive information. So one of the things that example highlights is something that we have found throughout, which it is clear that many organizations need to sharpen their security skills. And the way to do that includes trainings and doing practice rounds, drills, and putting in place procedures to properly protect consumers. So when we look at the future, because again, this data report is designed to help businesses keep our information private, obviously exposing where there have been breaches, but again, back to the point about let's be smart instead of reactive. Let's see what we can do to prevent it from happening in the future. So we have highlighted in this breach report, unlike previous editions, what can be done in terms of what we are calling guiding principles for the 21st century. And so we have come up with a core set of 4, what we believe should be guiding principles. One is that we have to have create user-centered privacy policies. See earlier discussion. The privacy policies have to be helpful and informative, and not just something that is part of just some grand gesture and process. And so right now, privacy policies are written for lawyers by lawyers. That's a problem. We need to apply the same creativity that goes into great websites into helping consumers understand the privacy implications. For example, within all of the fine print, there are a few issues that most consumers would always want to know, right? Just practically. And so let's lift them to the top instead of bearing the lead. 2, give consumers more control. It is a false choice to suggest that the consumer should and can have access to all or nothing. There are gradations. There are different levels, and so let's give consumers more choices. So users should be able to allow a rideshare app, for example, to track their location while the app is in use, but not when it is on in the background. This all or nothing approach it's a false choice. Let's improve the privacy setting defaults. So as smartphones travel, and they travel with us wherever we go, they go to the bathroom with us. I mean, where else could you go with somebody, right? So they go everywhere we go. So let's talk about that. Let's then, as they travel with us, choose default settings that don't expose consumers to risk. Companies should use opt-in defaults for data collection instead of making consumers opt out. Apple asks users if they want to give up an app access to location services, as an example. Okay. And then 4, ensure reasonable security. See in the report Appendix A, I think it's on page 39, and we have outlined the top 20 things that companies can do. And I'll tell you that that's the floor, not the ceiling. That's the minimum. That's the baseline of what they can do. because there are a set of federal and state statutory requirements and then just industry practices that mandate what these organizations can do to employ reasonable precautions and reasonable security practices. So for example, let's make sure that USB keys with sensitive data are encrypted. That's easy. That's simple. But again, this is a floor, and today's report is meant, again, to provide guidance around the minimum standards. And so I can't emphasize that enough. In conclusion, I'll say that again, I think that we're at a very exciting time. This is an industry technology that I think we'll all agree is very much in its infancy. The decisions that we make now about industry standards, about rules, about business models, will end up who knows where. It's so rapidly evolving and changing. And we do know, though, in spite of that, long-held principles and beliefs about things like privacy, fundamental issues like privacy, still apply. And so let's figure out a smart way of then making those principles apply in a way that we actually can get what we want, which is the ease of everything technology gives us, but without having to give up everything in the process.